This is the Stacking Days Podcast, the podcast about the healing experience of recovery for people of color by people of color. This show is for the purpose of education and connection and is not a replacement for therapy or recovery care. We suggest you seek out the support of a trained professional for guidance with your specific circumstance. I'm your host, Ray Donovan, and I've been alcohol-free since September 2021. Welcome to the show. Hey y'all, what's going on? Welcome back to the Stacking Days podcast. I'm your host, Ray Donovan. Really excited about today's episode. We have a juggernaut with us today. She's laughing, but it's just the truth. We got a juggernaut today. I mean, not only does she have an amazing story to share of her own trials, tribulations, and moving through to a brighter light, but also is just doing some amazing things as far as, assisting folks who are pursuing recovery and also just, being really a leader in the broader community, specifically, for folks of color. So without further ado, I want to invite Shari Hampton to the mic, give her a little introduction of herself, and we'll kind of get into it from there. Welcome to the show, Shari.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's just a pleasure to be here with you. Hold a little space. I have been sober for 8 years. I got sober on Valentine's Day, so I was sober 8 years as of this year. I am a nonprofit owner, so I run a nonprofit called Served Up Sober. A lot of people know me from Served. The premise is that we offer holistic services to folks who are in marginalized communities. It's been on a loving pause since COVID. I call it loving because it took a lot for me to put it on pause. But all of our programs really were in person and just really on the verge of getting that up and running again. So I'm also a life coach, recovery coach. I've been doing that. I've been coaching for a couple of decades, but recovery coaching since probably 2020. So that's really where all my focus goes now. I'm also a group facilitator for a couple of organizations that are out there in the community. And just living the sober life. Just happy to be here.
Awesome. I mean, you guys can all hear. I mean, she's been around. She's probably seen it all, and I feel like she's going to have a lot to really share with the listeners today. So, thanks for being here, Shari, first and foremost. And then I think where I'd love to start, and we don't have to spend too much time here because I really want to get into some of the stuff that you're up to today. But maybe just to kind of rote folks in context and give them some perspective on where you're coming from, can you just rewind back to kind of your relationship with alcohol, where that started and, why that came to pass? And then we'll kind of get further into, the bridge that you took into sobriety, because I think that's what I really want to get into with you today. Yeah,
for sure. Going back in time is a little bit of a challenge because I'm old. So going back is I would take you way back to, I guess, 1973. Okay. I was a young gay preteen in 73. And I think that's where my challenges started because I was very different from the beginning, just very different from my peers. I saw the world differently. And that was a different time period, juxtaposed to where we are today, even though there's crazy stuff happening today. But I didn't know what to do with my emotions, didn't know how to process my feelings and what I was going through. And so I think even before I started drinking, that was kind of like the fertile ground for needing to escape, right? Just being a young gay teenager, not quite knowing what to do with all of that. My drinking started when I felt like I was old enough to go to the bars. Actually, I was 18. I was trying to sneak into the bars. And I had a couple of older friends. That's when you had to get your hand stamped. And they would stamp their hand and take the wet ink and come and press their little hand on my hand. And I'd have like a little tiny vague, image on my hand. And I would use that to get into the bars. The bar scene is pretty much where I think, and even still today, where the LGBTQ plus community kind of creates this safe haven, right? Where we can communicate with one another, where we can commune with one another, where we can just be ourselves. And so back then, even more so, it was really an inclusive space where I felt safe and comfortable. And I was looking for a community, right? I had no idea where to find community. And so I would say that really kind of launched my drinking career, was looking for a place where I could feel safe and I could feel a sense of connection. And so I'd say in my 18th, 19th year, I was really drinking just full throttle. It didn't take long for me. I was really drinking full throttle. So all through my 20s, just doing my thing. I dropped out of college probably when I was 20, right? College wasn't working for me. I couldn't really do the things I wanted to do. Really wasn't a priority. I was actually going to an Adventist college, so a religious college, Loma Linda University in Riverside, and their values just didn't align with what I was into. So I dropped out. Interesting, and this was a short stint that I had with cocaine when I was like 22, right? That's when freebasing was really, really out there, really a big deal. But I didn't really... it didn't really give me what I think the alcohol did, and I can say I'm grateful for that, even though the alcohol journey was really devastating. I'm grateful that I didn't lean in to what I could have leaned in terms of freebase and in terms of cocaine being concerned. I think they would have taken me in either darker direction, if that makes sense. But
did alcohol just have a kind of a stronger appeal, or did you kind of like just intentionally say, I'm not going to get too hard here?
Yes, definitely. I didn't want to get too hard there. Somehow I was afraid of that, but wasn't really afraid of alcohol. I was just comforted when I was drinking. It felt like
that warm hug.
Yeah, it felt like, we got you. Don't need to worry. Let's sit down and be together. I felt really comfortable drinking. And so drinking was really my comfort all through my 20s. Not really being able, I think, to connect and find my person. Even though I had found community at the bars and I was going to the bars regularly, you're looking for your person. All your friends are coupled up and doing things. And I couldn't find my one. And so I think really at an early period, that kind of fueled my drinking. Like, I'm looking for my person. I'm looking for my one. Can't really find them. And so my 20s were really just not quite over the top, but definitely something that I looked to. I looked forward to drinking, right?
Can I ask you, at the time, did you feel as though that it was an issue, or was it kind of just more so the norm because it was a cornerstone of the community that you had found?
I felt like it was more of a norm.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't feel like at the time that it was an issue. I felt like it was just more of the norm. I didn't see it as a problem. I saw it as something that was normalized. I felt like, you know what, I'm going to work every day. I'm successful, paying my own bills, living on my own. And I would always say, I'm grown. I'm living on my own, right? So if I can drink and live on my own too and support myself, I'm fine with it. So I didn't really see it as a problem. In my 30s, though, I bought my first house when I was like 33, right? And I was a traveling sales rep. And so what I would do, obviously, I would be down for a week here at home, and then I'd travel for 3 weeks. I think we talked a little bit about your background, and when you're in that type of environment, it's all go hard, drink hard, go hard, party hard. And that's when I think things kind of turned from being what I saw as an option in my 20s to being a necessity in my 30s.
Right.
In my 30s, I kind of took it to the next level of dependency, I think. Really being really high during the day, high functioning, working really hard on the grind, 10-hour days, to feeling like I need this to just kind of calm down. I need this to be able to go to sleep. I need this because I'm alone in a hotel. It just changed. I
agree with you. It's interesting that that we get to that point where the kind of default to unlock all of those things for us is alcohol versus maybe looking for something else. There's something about like that slippery slope into coming from just kind of recreationally doing your thing in your own mind to now having to say, okay, I've had a long day today. I need X, or I need Y. Like I haven't talked to a lot of folks about that kind of like mindset shift, right? And why is it that we resort to the alcohol being the unlock or the mechanism for us versus a lot of these other kind of like more healthy self-care techniques that you can kind of engage in. I don't know, maybe that's something for later in the conversation, but we can park that for now.
You know what? I do want to kind of touch on that for now, because for me, and I don't want to make a blanket statement, but I think that a lot of it is cultural. And I think for me, seeing my grandmother and my uncles and my aunts kind of look at, it's been a long day, where's the Remy Martin?
Right.
You know, I've worked all week. Let's play cards and you know, pull out the tricks. We've all worked really, really hard this week. This is our time to kind of kick our feet up. And so I think that it was normalized. It's like, this is what you do when you had a long day. This is what you do when you're stressed out. I mean, I didn't know about taking medication to help me sleep, or I didn't know about meditating or do any of those other things. So I think that a lot of times we are mimicking what we've seen, right? And so I think that played a part also, is that this is okay for me to do.
You know, yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that. And if you kind of play that tape all the way back through the generations, you know, to where, you know, the hardest days that our people have worked, and, you know, what we were doing kind of in the time that we were you know, given off from, you know, being on the field, for example, and, you know, being given a little bit of, you know, a little bit of juice to kind of, you know, take the edge off, even in you know, kind of those slave times. So, like, I mean, I hadn't even thought about that kind of lineage until we just had that quick convo on it.
I think it's generational. So it's just something that I think has been the one thing that we've been allowed to, if I want to say control, the one thing that we've been allowed to access throughout the generations, I think. And so for me, witnessing that growing up, I did have this sense of, I didn't have the sense of this is bad. Even in my 30s, I wasn't feeling like this is a bad thing. Even though I knew that I was starting to probably drink a little bit more than I wanted to, I didn't see it as a bad thing, right? I mean, I was traveling, homeowner, plenty of money in my pocket. I just didn't see it as a bad thing. What made it become a bad thing is when I started using crystal meth. And that happened because I needed to be up, right? I was like, I'm tired. You know, I'm tired. When I wake up in the morning, I got to get back on a plane. It's like, oh my goodness. And I was introduced to that by a friend. And so it was affordable. I had easy access to it. And once that kind of happened, I realized everything was a problem. I'm like, okay, this is, I'm doing this, but this is really not what I want to be doing. You know, this is not what I want to be doing. But for some reason, once I started, it was just hard for me to put it down. It was hard for me to put it down. So my 30s really looked a lot like this, you know,
just trying to hold on,
being up during the day and just kind of mellowing out at night, and 10 hours in between of grinding, right? That's really what my 30s looked like. On my 40th birthday, and I tell you, I'm a California native, right? And I eventually sold my house in the middle of it was just the worst decision I could have made. But I eventually sold my house. And the year before I turned 40, I said, you know what? I need something different. I need a change. So I moved from San Diego to Indianapolis.
Okay.
I was like, you know, I'm not going to say who does that, because I mean, people do, they relocate, but that was a big, big, big cultural shock, right? It was
that's
different.
San Diego to Indy. So just pause. How did that move come about? Was that because you were like, I'm kind of just stuck in this cycle and I need a geographical shift, or what was pulling you to Indianapolis away from San Diego?
So I had someone that lived there that I knew.
Okay.
And so that had a lot to do with it, but really I knew I needed a change. And I felt like if I move away from my environment, right, to a place that is not California, you know, I saw Indianapolis as, you know, just kind of the Midwest, more laid back, not all this access to what I was doing. And I needed a change. I needed a drastic change right away. So I was like, okay, getting ready to enter into my 40s. This is going to be a new decade for me. I'm really going to shake all this stuff off. And so I moved to Indianapolis. That was probably the worst I think I spent maybe 7 or 8 years there, the worst 7 or 8 years of my life. because I didn't change, right? The access to the drugs changed, but I didn't change. So I just became more desperate. I became more reckless. There were periods when I was, trying to get things delivered. I mean, it just got messy. I'll just leave it
Right.
there. It just got really messy for me. And, I was unemployed. I lost so many jobs. I went into rehab several times. By that time, I had 2 DUIs. Another reason why I moved is because I was facing a third DUI in San Diego. So I guess let me add this because this was influential. And I had a choice of either doing an 18-month MAC project program in San Diego, or I said, I'm thinking about moving to Indianapolis. Oh, well, if you go there, it's a 3-month program. So
Okay.
I was also, and then I was facing a felony D in California. So moving to Indianapolis had a lot of attractive things for me. So I had 3 DUIs when I moved, right? Immediately I had to get into a program. So that happened as soon as I got there. I didn't have a job, right? The person that I thought I was going to live happily ever after with, we did not. I mean, was not a good situation.
Yeah.
And I'm far away from home. I'm far away from home and the people that love me. And it was just a downward spiral from the very beginning. From pretty much the time that I stepped down, it was just bad.
So you're all alone out there, just to your, at your own, trying to hold on. Okay.
Try to hold on. And I would say that's when the drinking really just became dark. It was bad in my 30s, but I didn't know it, if that makes any sense. It was bad in my 30s. If someone had walked into my life in my 30s and said they could have seen that I had a problem, but I didn't think I had a problem.
Right.
When I moved to Indianapolis, it became evident that I had a problem, that I had a drug problem, I had an alcohol problem, I had a substance use disorder, basically. And I looked for help. I went to church. I tried to find a church. I found a church. I went into IOP programs, inpatient programs, and I just couldn't quit. I got a stint of about 9 months. I was really kind of put some things together, put some time together. I was working for the school district, left the relationship that was really dysfunctional and unhealthy. And I was able to string together 9 months. And I was feeling pretty good. I'm like, okay, I got 9 months in. Life is being, starting to pan out for me. And then I got a phone call one day from my dad. My dad and I had a strange relationship. Love him to death. I believe he loved me to death. But we didn't communicate on a regular basis, right? It was probably call him on Father's Day, call him on his birthday. But I loved him, right? I loved him so much. And so he calls me one day at work. I'm at work when he calls. And first I'm alarmed because he's calling. Like, what are you doing? Why are you calling me? This is just out of the ordinary. And he says, I need you to come home. Just very matter of fact about it. I need you to come home. And I'm startled. I'm like, okay. And he says, I got about 3 months. I guess he just like that. And I remember I left work and I remember walking down the hall of the school and saying, this is a good enough reason for me to drink. Like, not that I don't know what the word is. I felt like I had been let off the hook.
Right. It gave you the permission.
It gave me permission to drink. And I felt completely justified and validated in that decision. And so I drank that day. And it took me, and the thing about drinking, it takes you right back. It takes you right back. It took me maybe 2 days to get to where I was drinking regularly and heavy. Took me probably 3 weeks to get back to where I was before, which was right at about a fifth a day. So I did move. I quit my job, put all my stuff in storage, and I drove back to California. My mom came and got me. The few stuff I wanted to take with me. Couldn't take my furniture or anything like that, but the few things, my books. It's funny what you take with you that really means something. It was my books and my CDs. Back then, we still had CDs, right? I was like, I want my books, I want my CDs, I want my clothes, and everything else went into storage. So I come back, and the interesting part is that he didn't die in 3 months. He lived, right? They got him on a certain medication. The medication was working. We put him on a raw diet. We just showered him with tons of healthy foods and healthy support, and his regimen was working, so he lived for. So I think I came back in 2000 and I want to say 11, yeah, maybe 2011, and he lived to 2015.
Wow,
Okay,
that's awesome.
The problem that I had though is that I wasn't sober, and so even though he was living, I wasn't taking advantage of that time.
Yeah.
I wasn't taking advantage. I was drunk all the time. I was either hungover or drunk. It was either one or the other. And I look back on it now, and even though I've worked through the regret piece, my first year of sobriety, I was really, really, really regretful because I felt like, you had all this time that you could have been spending with him, and instead you were drinking through the whole thing. You drank through all the time that you had. You just squandered it, basically.
So we're at a place right now where, you're in California, you're, taking care of your father. So in that 4 years, did you become sober at all in that 4 years or not until he had passed?
I became sober February, he passed in. I became sober 3 months before he died.
Okay.
And what really fueled me in the beginning, I wasn't getting sober because I needed to get sober, right? I was getting sober because I wanted to make it to his funeral. So the year before he passed, I tried to get sober, right? And we had a family friend. I was working for my stepdad at the time, and he was like, you know what? You're either going to have to get this under control, or I'm going to have to terminate you. And I was like, terminate me? I'm a drinker. I'm just toxic. My personality is toxic. My choices are toxic. I'm like, terminate me? You're my dad. You're not going to terminate me. And he said, yeah, if you don't get help, I'm going to have to let you go because you're just not working. You're just not working this job that I have for you. And so we had a family friend, Dr. Greer, and I always have to say his name out loud because he basically saved my life. Dr. William H. Greer, to be accurate. And he says, you know what, kiddo? He was a retired psychiatrist. He said, why don't you come and hang out at my house? His wife was a holistic practitioner, right? He's like, why don't you come in and hang out with us? And we'll just hang out. Very low key, no pressure. And I remember saying, okay, I'll come. And then I would just feel this, let me get my last drinks in. Let me just drink like one more day. Let me just have one more weekend. I drank on Sunday. I'll start next weekend. I mean, I went through that whole thing. Mm-hmm. And then finally I had a really bad hangover. My mom calls and she said, you ready to go to Dr. Greer's? I was like, she caught me right in a bad hangover. I'm like, yes.
Yeah. Let's go.
Let's go. I am ready to go. And so I get there. I had packed all my candy and a couple of Stouffer's. I was ready because I knew that they were vegetarian. What I realized is they weren't vegetarian. They were raw. Okay. So it was a whole nother level. It's a whole nother level when you're on a raw diet. And so, he just talked to me about what we were going to do. He said, I don't have any requirements in the house except for we're raw. So you're going to have to let go of whatever you brought in here to eat.
So there's no Stouffer's.
No Stouffer's and no sugar.
Okay.
Okay. And so the next morning I wake up and something smells like grass. And I'm like, what is going on? It smelled like fresh cut grass, which is not a bad smell, right? And that was the beginning of my stay with him. It was a smoothie right there on my nightstand. And he was like, okay, kiddo, let's go. Let's get up and going. And I remember saying to him, I'm so excited, Dr. Greer, you're going to teach me how to quit drinking. He was like, I'm not going to teach you how to quit drinking. He said, that's not what I do. He said, I'm going to teach you that life can't be meaningful if you don't quit drinking, right? And I quote that conversation so many times when I'm working with folks because it was, even though I didn't quit right away, that statement was a life changer for me.
Yeah.
It was a life
changer. I mean, that's a deep and very impactful paradigm shift of a statement. Mm-hmm. I love that.
Mm-hmm. So I would stay with them for 7 days, right? He would work with me. He'd do some psychoanalysis. We'd do some hypnosis. We'd do some deep meditation with him. And then his wife was constantly pumping all this nutrition in my body, right? And I would stay. And on the 7th day, he'd put me out. He'd say, okay, go home and practice what you learned, right? And I would go home. I'd practice it for about a week. And then I would relapse. And then I'd relapse. He'd say, okay, come on back. Let's do some more work. And that happened for about maybe 6 months. I would go back. I'd learn, I'd come home, maybe instead of 1 week, I'd put together 3 weeks, and we just kind of went back and forth like that. Even though I didn't stay sober when I got home, I learned how to take care of myself, right? I learned the value of a raw diet. I learned how to put together my own supplement regimen. I learned the value of chiropractic work and yoga and having a body worker and just all that stuff. I didn't get sober, though, at his house. I had that background, but it really didn't get me sober. What got me sober was I wanted to make it to my dad's funeral. And so 2 nights before I quit drinking, my mom had called me and she said, you know what, I need to talk to you. And I said, okay, sure. I went over to the house and she said, you know, you are taking my breath away. And I was like, taking your breath away? What do you mean? And she said, you know, every time I see you in the condition that you're in, I worry about you, and it takes my breath away when you leave. I don't know if you're going to make it home. I don't know if I'm going to get a phone call. I'm just worried sick about you. And that really got me. I mean, that was just a statement that really got me. I drank that night, of course. And I say of course because for me, it was just an absolute that I was going to drink that night. The next night I drank, so that would have been the 13th. And then the following day, which was Valentine's Day, was my sobriety date. So that was the last time I drank was February 13th, 2015. Wow.
That's I'm just going to pause you right there if I could, because when I hear all of that, a few different things. It's an interesting coincidence that the 3 months that your father had when he first called you to come home was the 3 months that you ultimately got back with him, before his funeral, from the time that you became sober. So I'm glad that I know that that was probably a challenging 3 months for you nonetheless, but I'm glad that you were able to get it in that state relative to maybe how you were, a couple months previous. The second thing that I wanted to note is you mentioning the work that you did with Dr. Greer and all of these foundational tools that you worked on, even though you weren't sober in the time, but you had those as pieces that you can kind of resort back to when you were in a position to be able to take full advantage of them. I think that that's, a unique point to make, because I feel like oftentimes folks feel as though that they need to stop drinking before they start doing the work, but it can go the other way around, right? Yeah. Like you can start doing some of the work, and maybe that work will lead you to a point where you're better positioned to take the reins of your own sobriety. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to mention that. And number 3, in hearing the story, I just hear that there's this like through line of love that you've had in your life, and whether it be, your Dr. Greer, I'm sure loved you in some form or fashion. Your father, your mom, clearly, I mean, the line of "you take my breath away." When you first mentioned that, I thought you were going to go in a different direction. Mm-hmm. But that ultimately, is what fueled you in a lot of ways. I feel like that's what I'm hearing is this love. So all to say, I'm so glad that you were able to lean in that direction and get to where you are today. So I wanted to pause you and just like give you those flowers. I always try to make sure that, I call folks up because everyone has a different journey, a different path. And like, sometimes you don't even see it in the moment, and sometimes you do. And those times when you actually do see the opportunity in front of you and take advantage of them, that's where beauty can really happen. So I'm glad that you were able to embrace all of those kind of like that constellation of stars, working towards your benefit. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So let's talk about that first year then. I mean, you got 3 months of sobriety, which I'm sure were very challenging because the first 90 days is challenging for everyone. And then you have the first year where you're also, grieving the passing of your father. So I'd love to get into that because I'm sure that first year you have a bunch that you can kind of share with the listeners.
Sure. I think so immediately once I kind of said, this is my day, and I was pretty determined on Valentine's Day. I felt like, this is a good day for me to get sober. It's an exclamation of self-love. And I was very lonely, but I just felt like this is a good day for me. This is a good day for me to get sober. The first 3 weeks I was miserable. I mean, I'm going to say it was longer than 3 days. A lot of people are like, if I can get to my 4th day, I'm feeling pretty good. The first 3 weeks I was miserable. I mean, I was laughing and crying hysterically sometimes at the same time. It was really, really hard. It was bad. By the fourth week, though, the clouds cleared a little bit, and I was like, okay, I know what to do. Like, I know what to do. I got in contact with Dr. Greer, and we just kind of reinforced some stuff. I know what to do. And he was so good in the way that he was like, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to give you a list of supplements. We went through that for 6 months. You know how to get your supplements together. Go to Jimbo's, go to Trader Joe's, go to Sprouts, get your supplements together. He guided me, but he didn't do it for me. And so after that first month, I knew that I had to really get my supports in place. And so I got a personal trainer. I found a chiropractor to use. I had an acupuncturist that I got involved with, and I did my supplements. So that's what I did. A personal trainer, holistic practitioner. I had a spiritual guide that I worked with, had a chiropractor, I had an acupuncturist, and I had my supplements. So that was kind of how I crafted the early days of my sobriety. I mean, he passed. So that 3 months, he was really sick. Mm-hmm. I mean, I didn't know he was going to pass in May, but he was sick during those 3 months. And so I was visiting probably 3 times a week. I would go. And I'd take him food, and we, spend a little time together. And that kind of happened for, maybe up to 3 weeks before he passed. And when he did pass, I don't know, for some reason I was at peace with, I knew I wasn't going to drink. Even though I wanted to drink, I knew I wasn't going to drink because I knew if I drank, I would get drunk and I wouldn't make it to his funeral. And I just felt like I had to honor him in that way. I could not dishonor my dad by either showing up drunk or not showing up at all. And I knew if I started drinking, one of those two things would happen. So I made it to the funeral. I'm sober. Everything is fine in terms of my drinking. And I'm proud of myself. I'm like, oh my God, you did this, right? You made it through not drinking. And I remember thinking, well, what else could possibly happen that would make me want to drink? I felt like I'm in a good spot in terms of my sobriety because I just survived my dad's funeral and I did not drink. Mm-hmm. And about 3 weeks after that, a month after that, my aunt passed away. Mm. And my mom and I had been low-key kind of taking care of her because she had had a massive stroke. And so that was hard. That was hard because my mom couldn't do it. She couldn't do any of the things that needed to be done. So I automatically just kind of went into reaction mode. What needs to be done? How do I need to handle this? And was really more of a service mode and really didn't think about, oh, I really want to drink this really, really hard.
Right.
And then about a month after that, my grandmother on my stepfather's side, his mother passed away. And again, he couldn't handle everything that was going on. So I stepped in and started handling things for him, planning the arrangements, making sure we had everything in place. It was just a weird turn of events, the way things happened. And my uncle died after that. And then Dr. Greer passed away in September.
Oh, man.
And, I was stunned because he was sick. But I remember saying, you know what, God, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that he's not going to die. Like, you just wouldn't do this to me right now. So I felt really good. I felt like this is not going to happen. He's going to turn around. I just felt like there's no way in hell that this could possibly happen this way. But he passed away in September. And I've said a lot of times that in a lot of ways, these special people in my life kept me sober. Mm-hmm. And I think it was because I just felt like I couldn't chase death with a cocktail. I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. It just felt so irreverent in a lot of ways. And so that was my first year, September. October, I played my first round of golf. And it's interesting. I've been wanting to play golf for 35 years, but I was always drunk on the weekends. I couldn't get up and play on a Saturday morning. I was hungover on a Sunday morning. And so I met a friend. I hadn't had friends in years and years and years and years. And my stepdad introduced me to someone at his church. She was a golf enthusiast. She was like, let's go out, come on out, let's play golf. And I played golf for the first time in October. That following year in January, so January 2016, I put together my nonprofit. And the nonprofit was something I talked to Dr. Greer about. It actually looked differently than what I ended up doing. But I pieced together, a kind of a framework of what I wanted towards the end of 2015. And in 2016, I launched Served Up Sober, which was my baby. So I did that. And basically the whole idea was to offer holistic services to women in marginalized communities, basically built on the structure of it was built on what I had done. So the whole concept of using all these holistic services and surrounding yourself or encapsulating yourself in those services, you didn't have to be sober to do that because I didn't have to be sober to do it, right? So it wasn't so much if you're sober, join our program. It was just join our program. Yep. And understanding and believing that that these types of support systems would push you almost into a different way of thinking. Mm-hmm. Not
similar to what it had done for you.
Exactly. Because even though I didn't quit right away, Dr. Greer really set the stage for me to see that it was possible. And it was all these holistic services. And so that's how Served kind of got started, is just wanting to provide. And, I did every single thing that I did with Dr. Greer, every single thing, even down to the acupuncture. We had someone come in and do group acupuncture with folks. We couldn't figure out how to get a chiropractor in. That was the one thing that we didn't do. But the meditation, and we had a physical trainer that came in, and we did everything minus the chiropractic work, and it was phenomenal. It was a phenomenal 5 years because we kind of were grounded by COVID. So COVID came in 2021. So from 2016 to 2021, we were really strong.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like it's coming back, right?
Yeah, I put it on a loving pause in 2021. It was hard, but we did go virtual with our groups. That was the one thing that we could do virtual, and we did do that. And then we actually merged, and it was hard for me to do, but I'm excited that I did it. She Recovers is an organization that has a big base of women, but they didn't have a community of BIPOC women. Mm-hmm. They didn't have that community. And what I like about them is their idea is that we're all recovering from something. Right? And so they came to me and they said, we really want to have this BIPOC community. We'd love to partner with you, right? And have this offering for our organization, right? They're nonprofit also. And it was hard to let my group go. It was so hard. It was hard to do that. But I felt like it would grow with them. And so the Served Up Sober BIPOC group kind of, we married Shari, right? And so they're still continuing the group, and I think the group is growing for them. And so that's where that landed. And then we're just starting to get back to offering services again with Served. We haven't started yet. I'm doing a lot of other projects. So I got to figure out how to bring that back together. But I really, really, really want to get off the ground and running with it again. So,
can I ask you when you're conducting your groups with Served, either in the past or now with She Recovers, what is the archetype of the women that you're working with? Where are they kind of in their journey if they're coming to and seeking you out?
That's such a good question. With Served, when we started the group with Served, they were young in their sobriety. They were young in their sobriety. I'd say either just dibbling and dabbling in sobriety or first 30 days. In terms of age demographic, that was just, the range was probably 24 to 45. 24 to 45, yeah. Obviously, they were all local. What was special about when we went virtual is then we attracted people from all over the world. Like we had some folks in Africa, folks in England, folks on the East Coast, some folks on the West Coast. That was really special. But when we were on the ground, obviously everyone was local, so everyone came from San Diego. Yeah.
And these are all women of color?
Most of them were women of color. And it's interesting that you asked that question because when I started Served, I was talking to my partner. I said, you know what? I just want to attract that Black kid from Oakland, and I saw who I wanted to attract. right?
Mm-hmm.
And how can I say that I didn't? That didn't end up being my demographic at all, not at all. And I talked about this with her, and I said, you know what? Why am I not attracting the demographic that I want to attract? And she said, well, your experience with holistic services is not the experience of AA, right? And I think for a lot of our communities, that's the only experience that has been made available is the AA experience. And so when I started Served, and this is, I want to make this point, I think that our community has been, I don't want to say afraid of healing, but healing has often been viewed as a weakness.
Absolutely.
Right? It's been viewed as a weakness. And so we either lean into religion, right? Or I think we lean into AA if we're struggling with addiction. And so my services didn't really attract who I wanted to. It really didn't. It attracted folks that had an experience like me. Mm-hmm. And I kept saying, why am I not attracting who I want to attract? And so my partner is a brander and she brands companies. And she said, because your brand is one of holistic services. And the folks that you want to attract have only known AA. And it was just, I struggled with that. I still struggle with it because I think that what's missing in our communities is access to holistic services.
Yeah. Which is unique because if you think about it, and you kind of go back through the lineage, that's where we all started, right?
That's where we all started.
And we've gotten so far away from that. And which is partially why I asked you the question, because I was curious, because I feel like in this day and age, we're kind of at one of those pivotal moments where, the aperture is being opened up a little bit more on recovery, on healing, on, well-being, on self-care, self-love in a way that maybe it wasn't 10 even 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. Where, something like, your organization and what you're doing will find that audience today versus, when you started it, because I just don't even know if there were platforms where folks were really talking about it in a very kind of public and scaled way where you can kind of access that message, so to speak.
This is new. I mean, even what you're doing is new, bringing recovery out into the open, into the light, I think, mm-hmm. Not necessarily in the open, but into the light of openness, seeing it as an elevation of living, right? Not a desperate, attempt to stay alive, but an elevation. That recovery is an elevation of living. That's new. It's still new. And I think that, it definitely 5 years ago, it was just starting to emerge. But even now, people are finally being able to say, you know what, you're right. I don't have to drink to live life on another level. I don't have to drink to enjoy my experiences. I can be completely present and authentic. And that's what gives my life more meaning and more depth and more color. You know what I mean? I think it's just starting to take hold, especially for our community.
Yeah. I mean, we're certainly at that point. And it's tough because, it's one thing to kind of talk it, but it's another thing for people to experience it, right? And I think that hurdle that one needs to kind of, and that threshold that one needs to get over, that first 30, 60, 90 days of not just white knuckling it through 90 days, but, having that support around you and that, and just examples that you can look to kind of prop up your own degree of success, then you can start leading into what this actually feels like for me in my life, and you hear this term out there that, sobriety is my superpower. What does that even mean? You don't really know what that means until you can start feeling it for yourself. And I feel like, folks are a little bit more open to that and leaning into that today. And we talked a little bit earlier about, alcohol, substances, all of these things that we don't talk about in our communities, and the fact that we just don't have a lot of avenues and resources to be able to address these things when we want to, it makes it really challenging for folks who are kind of still in the shadows, still in the dark, to step into the light because they don't even necessarily know what comes with it. And I feel like there's a degree of fear that comes with that. And I think that there's a degree of not wanting to be, perceived as vulnerable, or willing to be vulnerable with even yourself. And then, as a Black man, that's something that I really had to kind of get over, initially. Is like, how can I pursue a path where I know the only way that I can get over some of this stuff is to be vulnerable, right? And to step into spaces that, I 5 years ago I would have never done, because I didn't even know they existed. So I think things are changing. I mean, clearly you have a part to play in that. I think that's pretty obvious too. Let me talk about, so you have the nonprofit, and then you do individual work with your life and recovery coaching practice. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So is that the same mantra, the same kind of, build out of the program when you're working individually, where you have kind of like a really a natural kind of holistic approach to recovery?
I think it is, but it's really built on the statement that Dr. Greer made. Really built on that statement that, I'm not teaching anyone how to quit drinking.
Right.
That's not what we're doing. We obviously we go through the basics. I'm a recovery coach, so we're going to go through, identifying triggers and understanding your why and how you build a toolkit and what's your relapse prevention program. We do all that, but really at the core, it's how to bring out the gifts that are inside of you, and how to really expand those gifts into living. How do you find your purpose? How do you find your passion? What makes life really meaningful for you? And so I think when we tap into those things, seeing a life alcohol free becomes realistic. It's like, no, I did always want to be a chef. Well, then you should be wearing an apron with crumbs on it, rather than, if you're a chef, you're writing recipes down on napkins. You know what I mean? When do you have time to drink? You're busy creating recipes. And so I think pulling out of people what they're really passionate about. So yeah, we talk about all things sobriety. I think, I'm a recovery coach, so we talk about that. But what I really like to dive into is what do you really want to do? Mm-hmm. What is it that you really, really, really want to do? And how is alcohol impacting you and stopping you from doing that? So that's kind of my approach. I recommend holistic services. And again, that's part of the toolkit that folks create. But it really, we're deep diving into the details of how you want to live.
Mm-hmm. Just like the broad, the big question of life, and how do you pursue, life on the other side of this thing? Mm-hmm. I love that. I am curious, 8 years in, you've, seen a lot of seasons, in your sobriety. What are some of the tools that you now turn to in your kit today that, that keep you on, your path of sobriety? Or at 8 years, is it something that you don't even think about much anymore? I don't know. I got a long ways to go to catch up, but I'm just curious, where are you at, and what do you kind of lean into in order to stay your course?
I can tell you at 8 years in, it's just a way of life. Mm-hmm. Even when I'm getting ready to work with another client, sometimes I will go back through my notes when I was trying to quit, my journal, and just kind of get a renewed reflection of what my days were before I got sober, what my first day felt like, because I'm 8 years out.
Yeah.
Right. And so sometimes it's necessary to kind of go back and to read, this is how I felt my first week. This is what my first 30 days were like. And so do I still do all the things that I did? Yeah, I still do. But it's not necessarily to stay sober, because I think I'm basically just a non-drinker. It's almost like,
it's your lifestyle.
It's my lifestyle now. It's not something that I feel like I have to manage. I just don't drink.
No, that makes sense. Do you oftentimes, is it easy for you to see yourself in your clients?
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
I'm sure like all stages, right?
All stages, most definitely. Especially, folks that, well, just anyone, you can see, your first 30 days in a client, you can see the in and out of, I'm quitting for a little while and then I fall back. I'm quitting for a little while, then I fall back. I can definitely identify with that. And I also can identify with, life has to mean more than this. Right? It has to mean more than this. So wherever they are, I can find myself. I can find myself in them for sure.
That's awesome.
For sure.
I'm going to just rewind quickly because I something that I was thinking about earlier, and now talking about your client work, I think I want to bring it back up. So, and especially considering that you can obviously see yourself in your clients, just around the topic of relapse. So when you have clients who have relapsed, right? I think that for someone that could be devastating, right? They feel that they've failed in their attempt to be sober for the rest of their life. Being that you've also experienced that, how do you kind of navigate folks, through that challenge as being, a part of their journey?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. So for me, I see relapses as opportunities, right? I see them as information, right? And so, when I was in sales, they would say that it takes probably 100 no's to get to 3 yeses. Right, I think that's
Yep.
Isn't that it? I think 100.
Yeah, law of averages. That'll do
Something
it.
like that. And so whenever I have a person who has a relapse, I just tell them, you're getting close.
Yeah.
You're getting closer. You're getting closer. And look at the information that you just received. Is this a nagging job? Is this job just dragging you down? Does something happen at work and you're like, oh my God, is your relationship just not healthy? Have you been knowing that this is something you need to make a shift and a pivot from? Did you not call your dad on Father's Day, and has that just really gotten underneath your skin and you need to make a phone call? You just don't. Usually the relapses give you information about what's nagging and dogging your trail. And so for me, I see it as an opportunity. It's like, okay, why did you relapse? What was going on? This was going on. Okay, let's look at that.
Yeah.
Let's look at that. And then let's move forward. Let's say it is your job. Okay, well then how can we do something about that while we're working together? How can we incorporate that into your goals? Do you need to redo your resume? Do you need to put your resume out there? You need to ask for a promotion, whatever. And so usually the relapse is what we use to kind of plan what we're going to do next. So it's information.
That's awesome. And I mean, and really, like, it may seem counterintuitive, but almost a win in the journey if you can use it, right? Almost a win in the journey.
Almost.
That's great.
Almost.
So I'm going to start taking this plane in here for a landing. So I got a couple last questions that I want to ask you, and just caveat, there's no right answer. So the first question is, it's particularly in communities of color, I feel like, oftentimes, we're not able to diagnose what's going on with a loved one or with somebody else until maybe it's a little bit too late, right? So my question for you is, in those days where you were really, really struggling, maybe kind of in that period of your 30s, right before you were going to move to Indianapolis from San Diego, how would your, kind of your core, support network around you have known that you were struggling if you didn't explicitly tell them?
Oh, well, isolation. I say isolation. Isolating, not being reliable, not showing up, yeah.
Pretty straightforward stuff there.
Yeah, not showing up, not being reliable, isolating.
Okay.
I'm sure they knew before I knew.
What's that?
I said, I'm sure they knew before I knew.
Would you were you open to them coming to you and kind of bringing your problem to light, or were you of the addiction mindset where you were just kind of, blocking and tackling constantly, against any perceived, attack?
I was so defensive.
Yeah.
I was super defensive. Like I said, I got this. You don't have a right to tell me what to do. I'm supporting myself, stay out of my business, all of that.
I guess that brings me to a third question then before I get to the other one.
Okay.
So as a recovery coach, how would you suggest, someone kind of overcome that when, and this is for like speaking to the loved ones who are listening, when you're dealing with someone who clearly has an issue, but they're defensive and kind of pushing you off. How does one continue to support somebody, who is approaching, their issue with that degree of standoffness?
Yeah. Love. That's all you got.
Keep giving it to them.
You just have to, and love doesn't mean, what's the word I'm looking for? You know the word I'm looking for. Enabling them.
Sure.
Right. But I think just unconditional love, like, you know what? I love you. I love you, I love you, I love you. I think that that's really the best and only thing you can do, because people have to come to this in their own time.
Yeah. And I feel like love is probably the most, the softest landing that one can have, right? Yeah, into that. Last question for someone who's listening, to this conversation, and maybe they're sober curious, maybe they've been struggling for a long time, but they recognize that they have an issue that they want to address, but they don't necessarily know what their first step should be or could be. What would you suggest to that person?
I think the first thing that you have to do in order to figure out where you want to go is you have to know where you are, right? You can't even start saying, I want to go here, I want to do this, I want to get sober. You have to kind of have a clear understanding of where you are and just write it down. I mean, nowadays you don't have to write it down. You can do a voice memo on your phone, right? But I think really being able to say, this is where I am, and now this is where I want to go. So I think just self-reflection at first. You just have to really get clear about where you are. Like, where am I? What are my relationships looking like? What's my career looking like? Am I spiritually depleted? What's my physical health looking like? I mean, just really getting clear on where you are so that your why kind of formulates. Mm-hmm. You have to have a why. If you don't have a why, white knuckling can only get you so far. You have to have a deep-rooted why. And you have to get clear on what's going on with you first in order to get that. Yeah.
I think that it's a real gift from the standpoint of like using all of this as an opportunity to really, really be, honest with oneself, and audit one's self and kind of how they're showing up for themselves in their lives, to be able to identify that why. I had the hardest time like trying to figure out my why up until the point where when I did, but I agree with you. You getting to that point, you got to have some difficult conversations with yourself, for sure. Shari, where can listeners find you for more?
I'm a grammer, so I'm always on the gram. You can find me at I am Shari Hampton on Instagram. You can find me at sherryhampton.com. So my website is there. I'm not a huge Facebook person. I'm trying to get better, but really the easiest way to find me is just on Instagram. I am Shari Hampton, or either sherryhampton.com on my website.
Okay, cool. Well, everyone who's listening, please go seek Shari out. She is a boon of inspiration and knowledge, and like honestly actionable steps that we can all take as we kind of pursue our own journey. So with that, Shari, thank you so much for spending some time today. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was a great time.
Awesome. Well, we'll talk soon, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Stacking Days podcast. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, email me at rdg@stackingdays.com or follow us on Instagram at stackingdays. If you like the podcast, please rate, review, subscribe, and by all means share it with a friend who you think needs to be invited into the conversation. Until we meet again, be well, one day at a time.